Welcome. We're live with Tom Steyer here in Las Vegas. On behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, representing the Black Press of America, we thank you for taking this opportunity to speak with us and for us to speak to you about your campaign to be the next president of the United States. Tom, today, there are more than 50 million African Americans who live across the nation. If you are elected president, what is your vision for the future of America with specific reference to the challenges and opportunities for Black America to make more advances in this economy? I notice your theme is the economy. How can Black people be more effective, more efficient, and more profitable in this economy?
Well, Dr. Chavis, let me say this. There is no policy area in America that I don't think has a substantial, often unmentioned, but important aspect about race. So when you talk to me about housing or criminal justice or wages or education or climate, I think it's absolutely unrealistic to talk about it without bringing up the racial aspect of it, and specifically with regards to the Black community. So let me, before we start, and one thing you should know, and I don't know if you know it, is that my wife and I started a bank 15 years ago, long before I ever thought about running for anything, basically dedicated to economic justice, environmental sustainability, and supporting businesses owned by Black people, Latinos, and women, because the financial services industry is so prejudiced and discriminatory and won't support those people and the businesses and let them actually build the kind of wealth or get the kind of mortgages that allow families to grow their wealth. So it's not something that I've just discovered and I'm talking about because I'm running for president. That bank started with zero. It's a nonprofit, totally mission-driven bank, and it's over $1 billion now. We measure every single loan for its impact on the community. Does it create jobs in the communities? Does it support a Black-owned business? We've supported over 8,500 affordable housing units in the last 3 years. Because what we're trying to do is, if they redline it, then we go right there and try and figure out how to support the community and bring money so that people can live better. So having said that, I view Mr. Trump's claims about the economy as a pack of lies. That basically he's created the Mar-a-Lago economy, good for the members of the Mar-a-Lago Country Club. What I'm talking about doing is, first of all, I'd go after wages. I think we need a living wage. There's been an attack on working people in this country. It's especially, and so $7.25 is a minimum wage. No one can live on that. That's an insult to working people. I've been pushing for $15 minimum wage since 2012, and I don't really think it's high enough. I'm talking about a 10% tax cut for anybody in this country who makes less than $250,000 bucks. We can easily pay for it if we actually start charging rich people and big corporations their fair share. And I'm talking about creating more than 4.5 million good-paying union jobs to rebuild this country in a climate-smart way. And the last thing I want to say directly about this is this. We're in Las Vegas. And the last time I was here, I was speaking to a group of people, and in the front row was a 75-year-old African-American gentleman. And he said to me, Tom, are you aware that we've just built Raiders Stadium in Las Vegas, Nevada, and 1% of the contracts went to Black-owned firms? And I said, let me explain something to you. People don't like quota systems, but there is a quota system. It's 99%. That is absolutely wrong, because I'm in favor of a living wage. I'm in favor of pushing up minimum wages. I'm in favor of a progressive tax scheme. But more than that, I'm in favor of supporting new people in charge of the economy, of letting Black people own and control businesses, of actually letting Black people get their fair share of wealth generation and of wealth. And that's a whole different thing, and that's really what the bank is about, is letting people into the housing market, letting people into the entrepreneurial market, supporting people, including specifically the Black people who've been redlined and shut out.
All right, very good. You know, I'm not going to interrupt you when you answer the question. This is different from the debate. This is not a debate.
Well, Dr. Chavis, maybe I'll keep it a little shorter.
The Black press is interested in your in-depth, substantive answers. That's why we're doing this.
Okay.
We have over 230 African-American-owned newspapers and media companies all across the country. Many of them are listening. and watching this live all across the country, not on our websites, but also on our social media channels. So we wanted you to give those substantive answers because we need to hear what your campaign for president stands for and what are the possible impacts if you're elected president of the United States. So let me go to the second question.
Sure.
From your perspective, how important it is to you to receive support and votes from Black Americans here in Nevada, during the caucuses this weekend, and then on to South Carolina, and then to the Super Tuesday state primaries? How important is the Black vote?
Of paramount importance. And let me say this. I know that there are a lot of Black people in the Democratic Party, so I know that substantively those are big numbers. But I think that the impact of African American votes, to me, is symbolically much more important than that. Because one of the things that I've been saying this whole campaign, and I've been saying for years beforehand, is the African American community has been the moral leadership in the United States of America for the whole country. Not just for years or decades, but for generations and for centuries. And so to me, having African American support, it's certainly important in terms of numbers, but it has ramifications beyond the numbers. I've been saying for a long time, Dr. Chavis, that I believe the African American community will choose the next president of the United States, and that that's appropriate. And I believe if I have African American support, I can walk into an all-white room anywhere in this country and have a moral authority and a credibility completely based on that support that's entirely different. And I think that will be true when I'm talking to Democrats, independents, or Republicans. Because I truly believe it's not long before Dr. King and subsequent to Dr. King's assassination, there has been moral leadership coming from the African American community that resonates throughout this country. It's one of the reasons, I know we're going to get to it, that I'm for reparations. I think it's really important that that moral leadership be recognized and called out, because I think it's been so important for America for literally centuries.
Well, since you mentioned reparations, let's follow that. It's connected to the economic question I asked you in the beginning. It's not that we don't want to participate in the economy. It's just that a lot of restrictions and rules have denied us access to fully participate in the economy. Speak on your perspective of the importance of reparations. If you're president of the United States, most presidents don't talk about reparations.
None that I know of. No one. I'm the only person who'll talk about it who's running for president, for goodness sakes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you this opportunity. Speak to Black America about your concept, your commitment to reparations for people of African descent.
Yes. I don't think there's any question. And I say to people, did something terrible not happen? Or wasn't it terrible? Or should we not talk? Are we too so scared about it we won't talk about it? And we're not going to try and deliver justice for it? Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things that's true is when I went to Berlin, Germany, which I probably did for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, there's a big square that looks like the mall in Washington, D.C., and it's got the Congress and the president's house. And there's not 2 blocks away is a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. My question in the United States is, where's the apology? Where's the truth telling about what happened? Where's the apology from the nation for what happened to African Americans? And so what I'm saying is this. I'd have a formal commission on race starting the first day of my presidency, because I really believe that policy comes out of narrative. I would want it to be solution-oriented, specifically with the idea of reparations. But start with the story, not just of centuries of injustice and discrimination and cruelty legally in the Constitution, but also of contribution, which I was saying earlier, who built America and the moral leadership that the African American community has provided literally for centuries. And the reason to do that is to tell the story so that you understand how we got here. Black people don't have fewer homes that they own because they did something wrong. They were redlined specifically by banks and prevented from getting mortgages and buying homes. That there has been legalized, systematic discrimination and injustice that has to be repaired for. Yeah. Something bad has happened. If we're too scared to talk about it, then we're too scared to solve it. And if we want to be a just nation, if we want to be the nation that we claim we are, freedom, justice, equality, then we need to tell the story in the true way. We need to figure out how to repair the damage. And you know, I don't want to, as a white person, say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. I want to bring people along on the story and decide the best way to do it, knowing that we're talking about a lot of money, knowing that we're going to talk about the best way that should happen. And the example I'd use is, and I don't know if you know this, Dr. Chavis, but I've proposed $125 billion over 10 years to the historically black colleges and universities. Out of narrative comes policy. Black kids couldn't go to mainline colleges and universities down south. It was illegal. So they came up with a series of other institutions that have served that purpose, in my mind, really dramatically well, creating over half the black doctors and generals and judges and engineers and teachers. And they're starved for money. They don't have big endowments. The federal government's cut back by 42% over 10 years. They have high tuitions and kids come out with high student loans. I'm talking about not just reviving, rejuvenating, but actually pushing that to a new level, because these are important institutions to the kids, to the communities, and they really represent something out of narrative comes policy that we can't do well enough, and they're starved for money.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for your commitment to lead the country in the right direction on reparations. And then we segue into HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. Very recently, on the Kelly Wright Show on the new Black News Channel, this is the new 24/7 news channel that I'm helping J.C. Watts and others, and the NNPA is working with them to launch. But Dr. Leslie Baskerville, who's the president and CEO of the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, representing all of the HBCUs, made the statement that the future of America is going to be dependent upon how well we support these HBCUs, not only for black America, but also for white America. And I just want you to touch a little bit more. If you're elected president of the United States, what kind of effort will you lead as president to make sure that there's sustainability for all of the historically black colleges and universities?
Dr. Chavis, let me say this. That is, I'm talking about 30 times more on an average year than they're getting from the federal government now.
Okay.
And in the first year, I'm talking about 100 times more.
All right.
I'm talking about really bringing these universities to the level I believe they can reach, deserve to reach, and it's got a lot of policy behind it in terms of creating a structure for them to exist and to continue after those 10 years to be a force. But let me say this as well. My mom was a teacher. She taught in New York public schools, and after she retired from the public schools, she taught prisoners at the Brooklyn House of Detention. I am a huge, overwhelming believer on the impact of education to produce future prosperity, future mobility, and future justice. And so, the number one statistic that determines, that's correlated with somebody's success in our society, however you measure that, is third grade reading comprehension.
Yes.
So from my standpoint, as the son of my mother, as the brother of my brother, who's been an advocate for at-risk kids his whole career, they have been yelling at me for 35 plus years. If you don't get them by 3, Tom, you may be too late. You're probably too late. If you don't get them by 5, you're definitely too late.
Well, that's why we have the school-to-prison pipeline.
And that's exactly my point, and Dr. Chavis.
We need somebody in high authority like the President of the United States to end that kind of pipeline directly that leads to mass incarceration.
Which is the 21st century's version of the deepest injustice in our society. And so the reason I brought that up is we can't start too soon. If you think about the impact on that kid, on that family, on that community, on this country, of getting a kid on the right path by 3rd grade, as opposed to the wrong path, that's the best investment we're ever going to make. This Republican regime thinks that education spending is an expense for corporations that we should minimize and control. And if you look at Betsy DeVos, she doesn't like education. She doesn't like kids, as far as I can tell. They're trying to make sure that kids don't succeed. I see it exactly the opposite. That it's not, it's our future prosperity, because prosperity is productive, healthy Americans doing well. It's our future mobility. That if we aren't contributing money to make sure that kids from disadvantaged backgrounds get the same chance to move up, then mobility's gone. And it's our future justice. Because if we don't do that, then we're legislating inequality for the next generation. So when I wanted to talk about HBCUs,
yes,
but I wanted to make sure that I was in there, because
absolutely,
in my mind, you can't overemphasize the impact of giving a kid a chance when they're 3 years old or earlier.
Let me give you this question here, which is directly related, not only to the prison, the school to prison pipeline, but overall. I wrote out a question. I'm going to read this to you and wait for your response. Having a good education is key to progress for all people. But for far too many Black American families, there are today grossly inadequate funding measures to provide and to sustain high-quality education for our children in the nation's public schools. It has been 66 years since the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown decision. But today in 2020, most of the nation's public schools have resegregated and are terribly inadequately funded. What is your position on how to change and to improve the opportunities so that every child in America, not only Black children, but every child in America has the highest quality education without denial of racial discrimination or some other discriminating factor?
So I was anticipating your question. Look, it is shocking I said at the beginning, there is no policy area in America that doesn't have a huge racial component, often unspoken.
Right.
Often people are scared to talk about it. School segregation is a perfect example of it. We've resegregated the schools. The easiest thing to say about this, which is part of our plan, is to, Title I funds, which are federal funds to equalize spending by kid, to equalize for low-income kids as opposed to rich kids. As everybody knows, most education funding comes from school districts or states.
Correct.
And the federal government.
And a lot of times it's based on property rights. If you don't own
Exactly.
property, housing discrimination leads to education discrimination.
Exactly. And what I was saying to you earlier is, unless we equalize on that and support kids, we don't get mobility, we don't get justice, right, we don't get prosperity. And so I'm talking about tripling what are called Title I funds, which are the way of equalizing those numbers. But it's so much more than that. Because from my standpoint, we don't have universal pre-K. We obviously need universal pre-K for kids. If third grade reading comprehension is the way to break the school to prison pipeline, mm-hmm, then what an incredible investment it is to make sure that every kid can read well in third grade. And there's nothing we shouldn't be doing. And it is about schools, and it is about Title I. It's also about mental health. I don't think people understand in the United States how many kids are having mental health issues and how important it is to their ability to grow up healthily, to actually do well in third grade. But that is a huge issue, and it's something we should be spending money on, because it's something susceptible to focus and money to get kids on the right path and able to go forward and be really productive.
Right. Right before we started the interview, I was talking to Reverend William Barber.
You know who, of course.
Yes.
I
He's
know
leading
and
the Poor
admire.
People's Campaign. And he said that on these debates, these presidential debates, nobody's talking about poverty. There are over 100 million Americans living in poverty today.
I know.
In 2020. As President of the United States, what would you do to help lead this nation out of poverty?
Well, everything that I'm talking about economically really has to do with taking people out of poverty. Start on the earning side. Having a minimum wage of $15 is the first start towards raising a bunch of people out of poverty. $7.25 is working poverty.
The working poor.
The working poor. You're working a full-time job and you can't afford lots of stuff in your life. reinvigorating unions so that people can organize and negotiate for themselves is a really important thing. Rebuilding this country is millions and millions of good paying jobs across society to raise everybody up. Giving people a tax cut, everybody who makes less than $250,000, a tax cut of 10%. All of this is going after poverty. But on the other side, so that's all things to get people to earn more money to raise themselves up. I believe that affordable health care is a constitutional right for every American. It's not being observed in America, but I believe that. I believe that what we've been talking about, which is quality public education starting with universal preschool, is a right for every American today, and it's a poverty question. You know, I believe that clean air and clean water has a huge, we focus our poisons on black and brown communities around this country so that you can't breathe safely or drink the tap water. And, you know, we aren't even talking about one of the things that we've done. My wife and I started something in California called California Food for California Kids. It's farm to table in the public schools. We started with one school system and we said, don't subsidize us. Let us bring in farm to table for your kids because they're eating really unhealthy stuff and it's stopping them from doing good work in the afternoon, it's making them unhealthy. We're in schools now that provide 300 million meals a year, mostly to kids who are getting free and reduced lunch. And if you're getting a free lunch, you're not getting a great breakfast or a great dinner. So we're in a situation in the United States now where there's a lot of hunger, where we're seeing, and I don't know if you have run into this, Dr. Chavis, but for the last 2 or 3 years, as I've toured the country and talked to people, I'm hearing about more kids getting trafficked for food and a roof over their house, which I find shocking, but true, and we've got to talk about it. So when Reverend Barber's talking about poverty, we're seeing it in stuff like food. Hungry kids in the 21st century. In the United States, that's not right.
Exactly. Well, look, as one of the leading presidential candidates, I understand your numbers are growing in the poll. Can you help encourage your fellow candidates to start talking about poverty, to start talking about how to eliminate poverty? And also, as a successful business person, we need initiatives on how to build wealth in our community.
Totally.
Because you'll slip back into poverty if you don't have a pathway toward building wealth, toward owning your own home, not renting it, owning your own property. You talk about raising food. I come from a farming community in North Carolina. People are trying to go back to the farm to raise their food. But I just want to go back to healthcare 1 second. Access to affordable healthcare is a serious issue, as you've mentioned, that affects the quality of life of Black America. What presidential actions will you take to improve and ensure that our families and communities will have access to affordable health care? Because some health care that's out there is not affordable.
Of course it is.
People go to a hospital, I don't have to tell you the story, primarily through the emergency room because they don't have insurance. And then when they come out of the emergency room, they have a bill
that you can't believe
that will bankrupt them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Something is wrong. In the world's greatest economy,
yeah.
Why don't we have affordable health care for all people?
It's pretty simple, actually. The government has been purchased by corporations. Those corporations include the drug companies, the private hospitals, and the insurance companies. They're charging us double what other advanced countries pay for health care, and our health care is arguably worse. If you look at the drug companies, it's this most obvious comparison. They charge us 10 times more than they charge Canadians for insulin, which is a drug that was invented in 1930. It's not on patent.
Right, and African Americans disproportionately have diabetes.
Absolutely.
Need insulin. Some people have to trade their insulin off whether or not they can pay their other bills. It's terrible.
I believe that affordable health care is a right for every American in the 21st century. I believe it's the government's job to go after those drug companies, to go after those private hospitals, to go after those insurance companies and drive down costs. What I've said is this: I would build on the Affordable Care Act. I would have a public option to join Medicare, that everybody can join. I'd let people who wanted to keep their health care through their employment do it, but I would make it the job of the government of the United States to go after those companies and drive that. We're literally paying twice as much as other countries for the exact same or worse health care. And it is making people go bankrupt. I would get rid of the idea that you can have a surprise emergency room bill. I absolutely, people have to be able to get insurance with pre-existing conditions. President Obama took the first step.
Yes.
It was a big first step. It got tens of millions more of Americans covered. Now we need to take the next step, which is to make sure that everyone is covered and that the government drives down the cost. And you know, I did build a business from scratch. I was in the private sector for more than 30 years. I have no allegiance to any of these companies. I have complete and total allegiance to the American people, and I will ruthlessly negotiate on behalf of the American people because we're getting ripped off to the tune of $1.5 trillion every year. The companies like it, they're going to explain that the world will end if we make them charge us fairly, and I'm not going to listen to them.
All right. Tom, you're a successful business leader and entrepreneur. What will you do as president to enhance and to strengthen black-owned businesses?
Well, you know, what I would do is two things. One is I would try and make sure that the kind of community bank that we've developed starting in Oakland, California, which now has, I think, 17 branches and over $1 billion, that we support those around the country. What people need to build businesses is financial support from banks. And, you know, this has been something, I've talked to so many black entrepreneurs who've said to me, I can't get a loan. Like, I can't believe I can't get a loan.
Well, what do you think, what is the, let's dig a little deeper. If you have a solid business plan, you're educated, you have a degree in business, some even have masters, I've heard these same stories. Why are banks denying qualified entrepreneurs not to get the loans that they need to develop their businesses?
I think it's racism. I don't know what else it could be. Look, we started our bank to try and fill that hole. I mean, it's a non-profit bank in the sense that we've put the money in, we can never get it out. It has to be sustainable, so the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation will continue to insure our deposits, and so we can be a real bank. But we went in there on a mission to support those kinds of people. Let me tell you something else, Dr. Chavis, which I find amazing. I think 98% of the venture capital in this country, and I'm from Northern California, the home of venture capital, goes to white guys. That's an amazing fact. Because that is...
How can we change that?
Look, I believe a lot of this is framing. When I said I wanted to do a formal commission on race, I want to tell this story. I want to shame those people. You can't do that.
Now, I recall in 1968, 1969, the government, the Kerner Commission was about all of the uprisings in urban neighborhoods. And the Kerner Commission, at the end of the 1960s, concluded that there were two separate societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. But the enforcement of the findings of the commission never happened. So
if you're not solution-oriented, it's empty.
I just want to make sure that the commission that you're calling for will have an apparatus
to make things.
To enforce and to make change. In other words, not just list the problems, but you have to list the solutions to the problems.
If there aren't solutions, you're not getting reparations.
Right.
I mean, what I'm saying is this. There is an assumption on the behalf of the Republican Party that, you know, oh, some bad things happen, but now everything's equal. It's like, no. We got here a specific way. People have been damaged. You know, and that's why I told you that story about the Raiders Stadium. It's like, if you put in quotas that support African Americans, everyone's like, quotas. That's so un-American. Oh my God, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. There's a 99% quota for white people.
Right.
No one's up in arms going like 98% of venture capital going to white guys. It's like, oh yeah, that's just the market. No. We have to have a different story here about inclusion and making sure that those kind of old boy networks get broken down. Because otherwise, you can see they persist, they're unfair. And people come and go like, I couldn't believe it that I got turned down.
Well, again, you're not the first candidate for president or business leader or politician that know that this is a problem. But if I hear you, you are saying that if you're elected president, you're going to use the powerful office of the presidency to make a change in this area. Because, you know, I could just give you a litany of broken promises.
Broken promises is the word for the relationship with the Democratic Party with the African American community. But let me say this. I'm the person who started the bank and it's over $1 billion. I didn't talk about it, we did it. I'm the person who pushed to get rid of cash bail in California. We did. I spent a ton of effort organizing in Florida to restore rights to previously incarcerated people, and we did. The biggest campaign I've ever done in a primary general was to support Andrew Gillum, because I thought he would change the face of the United States of America.
Yes.
And Florida's a swing state. He'd change Florida, and Florida would change the United States. So actually, my big point to you is, I'm not just talking. I've been doing these things. I've been not just doing them, I've been getting it done. My mom wasn't in the public schools in New York for no reason. She knew who was in those schools. That was in the middle of civil rights. That was her way of doing civil rights, honest to goodness. That's why she was teaching prisoners in the Brooklyn House of Detention. In 1972, my mom voted for Shirley Chisholm. Everyone said, that's it, Marnie, isn't that cute? She said, no, it's not cute. She's the best person running for president by far. Everyone said, oh, isn't that cute? We can look back and say, by the way, my mom wasn't being cute. Shirley Chisholm was by far the best person running for president. In retrospect, she was the best by a mile.
Exactly.
I mean, by a mile.
Well, I'm certain a lot of our listeners in Brooklyn will be shaking their head today.
Just so you know, my dad went to the same high school that Shirley Chisholm went to.
Is that right?
In Brooklyn. And last thing I want to say is this, and I said to the youth before we started the formal interview, the person who I consider the bravest, smartest person on foreign policy in the last 20 years in the United States of America is a black congresswoman from Oakland named Barbara Lee.
Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Who's the only person who saw through that War Powers Act for George W. Bush to give him unlimited power to fight terrorism. She's the only person who made the right decision out of 435 congresspeople and 100 senators. Barbara Lee was the person who had the wisdom and the courage and the convictions to do the right thing. That's what I'm talking about, moral leadership.
Absolutely. If we had more Barbara Lees in the Congress of the United States, we'd be at a different place.
I've tried to talk about Barbara as much as possible because I consider her a hero and an unsung hero who doesn't sing her own praises. She just does the work.
So as president, there are 54 members of the Congressional Black Caucus today led by the Honorable Karen Bass.
I know.
Also Democrat of California.
I know.
Along
we're
with
proud of
Maxine
her.
Waters,
You know,
Democrat of California.
I told you, those three women, I think, rock it.
So how would you work with the Congressional Black Caucus?
Look, I told you, those are probably my three favorite Congress people. I said, I believe the African American community has been leading morally for longer than I've been alive. That's for darn sure, I think, for centuries. And you should know that our campaign is over 50% people of color.
Really?
It's over.
Talk about that.
It's not a fluke. Our bank's over 50% people of color. Doesn't just happen.
I mean, I think our listeners and our readers would be interested in that fact.
Look, my belief is it's not just about justice. It's about justice. The most diverse groups make the best decisions. That's statistically true. That's what all the research says. You can't be diverse enough. So, we've set, and it doesn't just happen by chance. The Raiders Stadium's a perfect example. You got to make sure it happens. We've made sure it happens. I would make sure any administration looked like our campaign.
All right, very good. Back in the 1980s, when I was working with the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice, I helped to coin the term, actually I coined the term environmental racism. And it gave birth to the environmental justice movement. I know you also have been outspoken on climate change, environmental matters. This coming week, when they have Ash Wednesday, the United Church of Christ is going to issue a new report on the proximity of hazardous waste facilities, toxic waste dumps, toxicity to African Americans and to other people of color. You would have thought after 25 years of addressing this, it would have gotten better. But we're still, that is Black Americans and others, are still disproportionately exposed to environmental hazards. And this also leads to maladies in health.
Of course.
60% of all African American children in Harlem have asthma. They're not born with asthma, they get asthma because of the conditions. So speak to the need for not only recognition that there's something called climate change, but overall environmental policies that are more humane and that can address some of the inequities that currently exist.
Well, Dr. Chavis, you may know I've been fighting on the climate wars for well over a decade. And I think I've led on it. I think I've passed more stuff than anybody else around the United States. I've blocked pipelines like the KXL pipeline. I stopped the last fossil fuel plant that I think will ever be proposed in California in a poor Latino part of Oxnard called the Puente plant. But I've done every single thing I've done starting more than a decade ago. Start with environmental justice. Start in the black and brown communities where the poisons are concentrated. Start in the places with the 92% rate of childhood asthma, the place where if you mix up a pitcher of lemonade with tap water, you get sick.
In Louisiana, there's a place called Cancer Alley.
I know there is. I've been there. I've been to Flint, Michigan. I know who lives in Flint. I know why that happened. That was a racial issue. Right. I've been to Newark, New Jersey. I know what's going on there. I've been down the San Joaquin Valley in California where 1 million people can't drink the water. I start with environmental justice as a racial issue. Because if you start there and you start with the people in those communities, the people in Denmark, South Carolina, where you can't drink the water because the state won't give them a water treatment facility and people get sick and die.
That's currently.
Yes. Led by a fantastic woman named Deanna Berry who's standing up for the people there and pushing back. The people who I trust, who I look to leadership, that I know if they're on my side, we'll get the right leadership and the right policy, are environmental justice people like Deanna. There's a guy who you should know if you don't know him, who I'd introduce you to, named Harold Mitchell, who's done the best environmental justice program, I think, in the United States, in Orangeburg, South Carolina, because his family got poisoned, killed by the chemical plant that lived next door.
We know South Carolina's an important state coming up.
Of course I know that. But I'm just saying, Harold is a total hero, brilliant, put it together for 20 years, has worked with Mustafa Ali, if you know him.
I know Mustafa very well.
Okay, what Mustafa's talking
His
about is
wife
what Harold
the head
does.
of the NAACP in Washington, D.C.
Oh, well, just so you know, those guys put together a project in Orangeburg that's fantastic. There's a guy in California, down in the poorest zip code of California, named Eduardo Garcia, legislator representing a district so poor it qualifies for Doctors Without Borders, one of the great environmentalists in the United States of America. Environmental justice. That's where I start. I care about climate because it's going to be so devastating for American people, and the people who are at the front end of that are black and brown.
Exactly.
And if you lead with them, their communities, their leadership, their wisdom, you get it right. And if you don't, you don't. And so everything I've done for over a decade in climate has started with environmental justice. It's what I was saying before. There's no policy area that doesn't have an unspoken racial aspect to it that you have to talk about. And if you deal with it, you get all the rest of it right. And if you don't, you get all the rest of it wrong.
Well, it's pleasing to hear you as a presidential candidate put the racial matter front and center. Most people try to sweep it under the carpet a little bit.
They try never to talk about it, Dr. Chavis.
And then it just goes on and on and on. And then we wonder, after all these decades, why do we still have a race problem in America? It is our denial as a society. It is our refusal as a society to comprehensively deal with the deep-seated, systematic reality of racism. So, it's encouraging to hear you as a presidential candidate take that position.
Well, you know, Dr. Chavis, I was talking to somebody 2 days ago, I think, and she said to me, they're presidential candidates that want to make all of college free and forgive all college debt. They're presidential candidates that want to have Medicare for all, regardless of what it costs. How come you're the only person who will talk about reparations for black people?
Right. Well, listen, you touched on something. We got about 5 more minutes, but I got to ask you about last night. We're here in Nevada. Millions of people watching the TV last night of the presidential debate. Why are Democrats fighting each other like this? You know who won the debate last night?
I do. Donald Trump.
So, as a candidate yourself, can you speak to the other candidates? It's okay to have a disagreement, but I don't think we should try to destroy one another to gain polling points in a national poll. The turnout, we're going to need a large voter turnout in 2020.
Yes, we are.
And people running for president have to keep in mind what turns people on and what turns people off. You know, most people in the black community, they don't want to be involved with all this divisiveness. some almost hatred of one another. Martin Luther King talked about the beloved community, where love would bring us together. Yes, we can disagree on some of the issues, but on some things we ought to have unity around. I'm hoping that you, as one of the candidates, would speak to your fellow candidates running for president on the Democratic side. And I would say the same thing to the Republicans. We need things that will unite us and not divide us.
Well, Dr. Chavis, let me say this. Clearly, we have a country that has a huge spiritual problem, that we've lost a vision of what it means to be an American and what America itself means, which is supposed to be an idea about freedom and justice and equality. And I believe that the Democratic candidate has got to put forward that kind. Why are we going to be so much better than this racist, divisive president? Because we have a vision of what it can actually look like. That we have a vision of what we're trying to create together, the kind of society, how we're going to treat each other, what we're going to stand for, how we're going to lead the world again in terms of freedom and equality and justice, and how we're going to make that happen at home and abroad, who we're going to be. I don't think there's any question that if you have a society that has crises of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and suicide, that you've lost a vision of what you're trying to create on this earth, why we're on this earth, where our hearts really go, why it makes sense, that what we're doing while we're here. I think there's no question that that's the kind of vision that we need, not just to get people to the polls, but for people to understand. That's why reparations really matter.
Yes.
Do we stand for something more important than GDP per capita?
Right.
And my answer is, heck yes. That's why we're on the planet in the first place, to leave it better, to do good, to have a meaningful life together and support each other. That's the whole point.
Well, thank you for that answer. One thing I did not bring up, I must bring it up before we end this dialogue. Today, in America, there are 64,000 missing black girls. 64,000. As President of the United States, can you help black America sound an alarm? Do something about it. The young sister from the University of Georgia who took her Uber just last week, they found her body. She was missing, they found her body. What can we do? It is outrageous that 64,000 black girls are missing and nobody talks about it.
And no one does anything about it. Imagine the terror and pain of those girls, what they're undergoing to end up in that situation. And if that is, if you think about the job of the commander-in-chief, to make sure that Americans are safe and out of harm's way.
Absolutely.
And people want to think about that in terms of soldiers overseas, and of course, that is something the commander-in-chief has to make paramount importance. But how about thousands of black girls in harm's way?
We have to do something about it.
Goodness gracious, honestly, I was saying to you before, I'm hearing about young kids being trafficked
but I think
for
one of the reasons
food
why
and a
people
roof.
are not doing anything, they don't hear enough about it. It's not mentioned in the presidential debates. The black press, I'm so proud of my publishers.
Are speaking up.
We're putting it on the front page. One of my award-winning journalists is here, Stacey Brown, who's done a lead story. The Black News Channel now is also covering the 64,000 missing black girls. But shouldn't others
Absolutely.
beyond black America be concerned?
Think about that number.
Yes, 64,000.
That is more than the number of soldiers that we as a country lost in all of Vietnam.
That's correct.
Just to put it in context.
That's correct.
So in the context, how can we not see that as something deserving of a laser-like focus to end it?
Right. It looks like this primary, just like it's going to be a brokered convention. Everybody wants to know, well, who won this primary, who won that primary. It looks like it's going to the convention as a brokered convention. Will you make sure that in the Democratic platform, the issue of the 64,000 missing black girls is included?
Dr. Chavis, if you noticed, two debates ago, halfway through, I said, look, we're in the middle of this debate. No one on this stage has mentioned race.
That's true.
No one on this stage is addressing the specific issues of the African American community. How is that possible? You know, I listen to those debates and I feel like, am I in an alternative reality here? Like, what happened to the actual issues of the American people? Are we going to address the thing? I mean, 64,000 missing girls. Are you kidding me?
Well,
We have got to get down at street level and start talking about what's actually impacting people's lives and doing something about it in a concentrated way. Look, that's why the fact that these corporations own the government is so painful. It's because they have their issues and they're being attended to very, very well. The problem is that means the people of the United States aren't getting a thing. That's the fight here.
Well, Tom, on behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the Black Press of America, we thank you for this time. I want to close out with this. I want you to use these few moments left. Speak to the black press, speak to Black America. Why should Tom Steyer be president of the United States of America?
Well, let me say this. I've been talking about my history of acting with and on behalf of the African American community. I've been talking about policies that I would support that specifically address the African American community and everybody, all working people and poor people across this country. But I want to say something different, Dr. Chavis. Look, I draw a cross on my hand every day. And I do that to remind myself that it is important to do the right thing no matter what, even if they put you on the cross. And I went after Donald Trump with the need to impeach because I thought that he was not just corrupt, but he was criminally corrupt. He was dangerous to the people of the United States. And when you see something like that, you got to stand up and fight it as early as possible. So what I'm saying is this. I'm not doing this out of a serious, because it's a career move for me. I'm not doing it out of some, crazy ego-driven need. I'm doing it because I think there's something wrong here. I'm completely committed to writing it. I'm not somewhat committed to writing it. I'm 100% committed to it. I believe we have to save this country and save this planet for our kids and grandkids, and I'm making my stand in this campaign.
All right. Thank you for your statement. God bless you. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chavis. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, sir.